So I would like to speak about a very important subject today. It's Emunah and Parnasa. Life is like an ocean. Sometimes the waters are calm and waves roll smoothly and peacefully, but frequently a storm erupts and the waves become wild, rising higher and higher. At times we feel there is a real risk of drowning. The story is told of the great Hasidic Rabbi Eliezer of Lizensk. He once sat at a Shalashudas, a Sudash Lishit, with his disciples crowded around the table. They were thirstily drinking in his words of wisdom. Suddenly he paused and he asked them, "What is Chevle Mashiach, the birth pangs of Mashiach?" They responded with silence, waiting to hear what the great Hasidic master, what their Rebbe, Rabbi Eliezer, would answer. He said, "Before Mashiach comes, Hashem will take a rope and he'll hang it from one end of the world to the opposite end. Then he will shake the rope up and down with great force. Those who hold on very tight, they'll be fine, they'll survive. But those who loosen their grip, they will fall." At times, we feel like we're holding onto a rope and someone or something is shaking it and we're trying our utmost just to hold it on. Emunah means belief in Hashem. The first of the 10 Commandments, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God. Emunah is that which gives us the strength to hold on. This rope that is shaking is a chevel, the same word as the Chevle Mashiach, the birth pangs of Mashiach. It's a rope. It's the Chevle Mashiach. Hashem is shaking the world before Mashiach comes. Our job is to hold on. Emunah, faith, trust in Hashem, it connects us directly to God, who can pull us up and beyond the mightiest of waves. Last week's parasha was Noah talking about waves and water. Emunah, I think, is the ark that we shelter and we take refuge in. The world can be a stormy place, as we know, especially at the moment. We'll speak a little bit about the coronavirus a little later on. But Emunah gives me the inner strength and resilience that I need to cope in all situations. But it goes beyond this. We can, at any moment, at precisely those challenging moments we all experience, to grab hold of the rope and reach great heights, far more than when everything ran smoothly. The world is a beautiful place, and it's a much more secure and serene place when we are aware and we really believe that we have the full support of God who is with us, and when we have an intimate relationship with him. Rabbi David Asher, who has written some amazing books, I think he's written about 5 volumes of living Emunah. He writes in one of his books that Emunah is something that we can all access and attain greatness in. There are great and successful people out there. They may be great in Torah learning, in knowledge, halacha, Torah thought, philosophy, whatever it is, maybe in chesed, kindness. And we may feel, perhaps rightly, that we can't reach greatness. We can't become great in Torah knowledge, maybe philosophy, chesed, whatever it is, perhaps rightly or wrongly. But there is something, he says, that we can all become great in. We can all become a godel in that area. And that area is Emunah, belief in Hashem. Without exception, we can all ascend the ladder of Emunah and achieve greatness in this area. This is within the potential of every single Jew, incrementally, individually, at our own pace, but we can all ascend that ladder. We must not think, and this is very important, ladies and gentlemen, or ladies, we must not think that Emunah is for tzaddikim, holy, righteous people only for rabbis or rebbetzin saying Tehillim all day. Emunah is a mitzvah, an obligation, and it's also a very good idea. It allows us to grow and develop as people, as Jews, and to have a personal, intimate relationship with Hashem. The Chofetz Chaim gives a beautiful mashal. Somebody is shipwrecked on a desert island. He knows he's only got a few hours before he's rescued. And he sees on the seashore precious stones and diamonds, more than his wildest dreams. He can't pick them all up. There are too many. So what should he do? Should he shrug his shoulders and say, you know what, I can't pick them all up, so what's the point? There's no point trying. Of course not. That would be ridiculous. What does he do? He bends down. He tries to collect and stuff as many of them as possible into his pockets, into his rucksack, into his socks and shoes, whatever he can do, under his hat. In the same way, we can all utilize this gift of Emunah in so many ways, as the value of each level is so tremendous. It really is tremendous. Every step is a great accomplishment. Happiness, contentment, serenity, lower blood pressure, a healthy constitution, a healthy heart, less worry, resilience, just a few of the many and varied blessings Emunah, faith, brings to one's life. At the moment, many of us are struggling with the effects of coronavirus, COVID-19. Self-isolation, quarantine, social distancing, new words that have recently entered our daily vocabularies. Let's be honest, life at the moment is a struggle. There are challenges every day. We cannot meet who we want to meet. We can't embrace who we want to embrace. We can't go where we want to go. We are not even given the liberty of walking around and breathing the air we want to breathe. Have to wear that awful mask. Life is a struggle for many of us. Today, more than ever, we need the gift that is Emunah, belief in Hashem, that offers us that anchor in a stormy and uncertain world. Last week was Parashas Noah. Noah certainly lived through very stormy times. He certainly felt that he was being tossed around in an ocean. Not only was he in choppy waters from the outside, but just think for a moment how tough life was from the inside also. You know, our son recently, he's been in self-isolation, not once but twice, because of two teachers who have had coronavirus. Noah was in self-isolation. He was in a bubble for a whole year. From the moment he entered the ark until he left was exactly 365 days. It wasn't easy. Imagine being cooped up with your family and a mobile zoo and not seeing any other humans for a whole year. You know, they say there are three ways you can travel: first class, economy, or with children, with a family. I don't know what you call traveling with a mobile zoo or a safari park would be called. It was extremely taxing. The Midrash explains the toll it took on Noah, on his health, how hard it was. But if we think about it, the ark was a bubble of Emunah that allowed Noah to ride the waves and then to ultimately emerge after the storm had abated, a stronger man in body and in soul. Because as we have said, with Emunah, you can ride all waves. You can ascend the highest mountains. Without it, you can barely crawl out of bed. Now, that was an introduction. I want to move on to the next section of the share. I want to speak about integrity, honesty, and then hopefully we can connect these two strands, these two elements together. Now, honesty, we all know, is absolutely paramount to the life of a Jew. Honesty is the hallmark of Hashem. We are told that the seal of Hashem is emes, truth. If you have a look at the word emes, aleph, mem, tov, aleph is the first letter of the aleph base, mem is the middle, tov is the last one. Emes spans the entire existence of the world. It is all-encompassing. Honesty has to affect all areas of one's life. Honesty at home, with one's children, with parents, with the spouse, with colleagues, friends. But there is an area that is probably more important than any other area, and that is in money matters. This is where we often have the greatest Yetzer Hara, I feel. This could be because of a few reasons. Perhaps we may feel the amounts are sometimes very small, a few pounds here and there, or on the other hand, it could be the gains are greatest. We have so much, we can save, we can profit. It could be because it's easy not to be caught. It could be because other people are also doing it. Other people are also cutting corners. It could be, often we think the Avera is of lesser severity because maybe we're stealing from non-Jews. Sometimes we need the money. We may rationalize and think, I have bills. There is a great temptation. A person may have financial problems that cloud one's judgment and cause people to cut corners and act dishonestly. Money is a temptation. We're all human. But with the right perspective and with Emunah, we can all be mechazik in this area of integrity, realizing that what we have is exactly what Hashem wants us to have. And what we have is exactly what we need to have. It's best for us because Hashem has given it to us. And if we have this in mind, it will remove the need to try to gain money or possessions illicitly. Yaakov Avinu said, Yeshli kol, I've got everything. Esau, on the other hand, his twin brother said, Yeshli rav, I've got a lot, but I could do with a little more. Yaakov Avinu understood that what he has is all he needs to serve Hashem. He doesn't need a penny more. I have everything. Esau, on the other hand, said, I've got a lot, but I could always do with a little more. If we have the mentality, the attitude that whatever I have, whatever Hashem has given me is what I need, this will make it much easier to try to overcome those temptations in money matters, in financial matters. The question, however, that many of us may be asking, and we can't just hide ourselves from this, is, how much do I need? That is the million-dollar question. So to attempt to understand this subject, we have to speak for a few minutes about parnasa, earning money, and hishtadlus and emunah, how much effort I need to put in. This is a sometimes misunderstood subject. At times, it is possible that people can rationalize dubious financial behavior with the argument, either consciously or subconsciously, that what I am doing is necessary for the sake of hishtadlus. I need to try. I can't expect Hashem to bring manna down from heaven. I need to put in my own personal effort. At times, people push themselves too hard for the sake of hishtadlus, this effort that we have to put in to pay bills, earn the money that we need to live or to justify our lifestyle. And people cut corners, or they do things they wouldn't have done otherwise because of this need to push themselves for the sake of hishtadlus. So we need to understand, what is hishtadlus, this very common word that we use, that we band around, hishtadlus, effort, putting effort into our parnasa, earning a parnasa. So a better understanding of this subject, please God, will help us to understand the subject and will remove temptations to swindle and will help in making us into upright Jewish men and women so we become Jewish men and women with Emunah, integrity, and Yashrus. So the Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, he explains in his very famous work, the Mesilas Yesharim, a very important principle. He says, if not for Adam's sin, we would be able to sit back idly and receive the money from Hashem on a silver platter. Before Adam sinned, he had full access to the full bounty of Gan Eden. He had a credit card, whatever he wanted, Hashem gave it to him. Angels served him gourmet meals on golden platters. But after he sinned, Hashem told him, by the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread. We've got to work. The free ride was over. The Ramchal, Luzzatto, goes on to explain that this is a tax that has to be paid. We are no longer allowed to rely totally on Hashem to do miracles for us. A person must do his part. And this is called hishtadlus. However, and this is the important part, we must be absolutely clear in our minds that it is not the hishtadlus that brings in the income. We have to carry out that tax. But the money we earn is determined each year on Rosh Hashanah, as the Talmud explains. It's not the hishtadlus that brings in the money. We need to work. That's the curse that we received, that Adam got. But that is not what brings in the paycheck at the end of the day. However hard we work, we will not receive a penny more than what was decided on Rosh Hashanah. No added hishtadlus will bring in more money. Imagine you have a huge water tank with a single tap. So you're a bit irritated. It takes so long for the water to come out. Perhaps it's filling a bath. So you take another tap and you insert it into the tank so that more water will emerge. So it might seem as if all of a sudden more water is filling this big bath. You might think that you now have a bigger water supply. But the second tap does not create more water in the tank. In the end, the person will only have access to the amount that is there in that tank. Likewise, working harder will not bring in extra income, although it may appear to be doing so. Rabbi Shlomo Shvadron, the famous Maggid of Yerushalayim, he would compare a person doing hishtadlus to a child sitting next to the bus driver. The driver, per se, pretends steering wheel in front of the child. And the child spins it around, certain that he's driving the bus. Like that child, we sit in the driver's seat and we think that we are driving. Of course, like we just said, we all have to work. Very few of us are on the level that we receive a check in the post every time we have to pay a bill, pay the mortgage. Although there are people on very high levels, there are many stories about people like that. But many of us, sadly, are not quite there yet. So how do we work out the level that we are at? What is this balance of hishtadlus versus bitochen that we should be aiming for? So Rabbi Dessler, the famous Jewish thinker, philosopher, he explains that in essence, one has to be honest with oneself. One needs self-awareness to determine the madrega, the level that you are at. If a person is living in a certain way that is beyond his level, that he is not yet ready to be on such a high level of Emunah, And by living on that level, he ends up being toya al harishon, as he says, regretting his prior actions, that he could have, should have, would have done more. Then that means he is not there yet. It's very deep, we have to think about it. If someone decides that they will leave the office and work 2 hours less, they will learn Daf Yomi, hear a shir, instead of working those 2 hours. And as a result, he or she will regret that they could have had more business meetings. Maybe late in the evening, they would have called more people on the phone. They could have finished off more cases, starting new cases, whatever the rationalization. If they think that they could have earned more money during that time, then it's clear that you're not quite there at this time. One of the heaviest burdens that seem to come with the obligation of earning a parnasa is the worry that accompanies the work. People in business, they worry, they fret endlessly. Sales, customers, employees, it's normal. We're all human. The cost of raw materials, the state of the market, people who work for others, they have different fears. They live in a fear of displeasing the boss, being outshone maybe by a co-worker. However, none of this is hishtadlus, and it adds an unnecessary strain on our lives. The following mashal, a very clever mashal, parable of the Chofetz Chaim, describes how futile and unnecessary worry is, carrying these unnecessary burdens. So Yankel, he was riding his horse-drawn wagon when he noticed his friend Yossel trudging down the street with 2 heavy sacks on his back. Yossel, he says, "Climb aboard." "Where are you going?" "You're going home?" "I'm going in your direction. Climb aboard, I'll give you a lift." Several minutes later, Yankel turns around and he's surprised to see Yossel sitting bent over with 2 large sacks still strapped to his bag. "Why don't you remove those bags?" he asks. "Oh, Yankel, it's kind enough of you to take me," came the reply. "I don't want to burden you with carrying my bags too." So the person who walks around with a heavy heart and aching shoulders from the burden of worrying about parnasa is like the foolish person who gets the ride on the wagon, and even while he's on the wagon, he still has the rucksack on his shoulder because he doesn't want to burden the driver, so he doesn't want to take it off. He doesn't realize that the weight of his parnasa is already being carried by Hashem. Hashem has broad shoulders. Hashem can carry him and his burden and his worries. He can totally remove the worries. Even though a person has an obligation to pay his minimum tax, this tax that we spoke about, we don't need to take on the worry, the pressure, or the responsibility for the results of the effort. We have to do our job, but we are not in charge. Therefore, we can remove the burden. As the Pasuk says in Tehillim, Hashlech al Hashem yahavcha v'hu yichalkelecha. Beautiful Pasuk. Cast your burden upon Hashem, and he will sustain you. And the more a person allows Hashem to be totally in control, the more Hashem divests himself from the natural order of this world, and he gives himself over to Hashem, the more Hashem will take him under his wing, and the more Hashem will allow this person to live on that high level of Emunah with an ability to see how Hashem clearly gives him his parnasa at all times. Our Emunah skills, they must be strong enough to fearlessly balance on the edge of the cliff. It's like you're walking on this cliff, on this precipice. So the experienced mountain climber knows that he must not look down. If he lets fear overwhelm him, he risks falling. Likewise, someone scaling the peaks of Emunah must have the strength and courage to climb fearlessly. Otherwise, he or she risks a terrible fall, and he is far better off seeking a path on which he feels more secure and maybe building up to that high level of Emunah at a later date. So the following story, it brilliantly illustrates the difference between a sure-footed bitachon and a shaky bitachon. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, the famous founder of the Muslim movement, he once delivered a powerful address on parnosa and bitachon, trust in Hashem. Shmelka, who was greatly moved by the speech, he went over to Rabbi Yisrael and Rabbi Salanter, and he asks, Rebbe, is it true that I can buy a lottery ticket and trust that Hashem will send me parnosa by letting me win the prize? I can buy the lottery ticket and I'll win, and that will take care of all my financial needs. Rabbi Salanter said, it's true. If you really believe that your parnosa is from Hashem, buying a lottery ticket can be sufficient hishtadlus, sufficient effort. So the next morning, Shmelka, he buys a ticket for the raffle, scheduled for 2 weeks. He quits his job and he goes to the Beit Medrash. He buries himself in his books. During the next 2 weeks, money was scarce, but Shmelka was armed with that hope. Please God, he's going to win. The day before the lottery, after Mincha, he noticed Rabbi Yisrael Salanter leaving the shul, and he approaches him. Rebbe, he exclaims, I did as you said. I put my bitachon, my emunah, my faith in Hashem. I gave it my job. I bought a lottery ticket. Tomorrow, I am going to win 40,000 rubles. Rabbi Yisrael says, wow, really, that's amazing. You know, I happen to have a substantial sum of money with me in my pocket. Would you consider selling me your ticket for 10,000 rubles? Right here and now. Shmelka pauses for a second, then he answers, if the Rav would like to buy a ticket for 10,000 rubles, I will readily agree. If so, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter gently says, then you don't really have sincere bitachon, sincere trust. A person who is absolutely certain that his ticket is the one that will win the 40,000 rubles tomorrow will not agree to sell that same ticket for a quarter of its value today. That being the case, Rabbi Salanter says, it would be best for you to go back to learning an honest livelihood while setting aside time to learn Torah every day. There are so many beautiful, inspiring, uplifting stories of real emunah, of an elevated level. I would love to share with you. Sadly, I cannot because I can't keep you all night. The shir will never end, and you will need emunah that you would ever get to bed tonight. But there is a book called Living Emunah. I mentioned it before. Buy this book. This book is amazing. You see it here. Can't see it so well because of the background. Living Emunah. There you go. It's become a bestseller. It sold tens of thousands of copies. It's revolutionized the lives of so many people. It allows Jewish people to live with faith and serenity. We have a principle, an axiom in Judaism, that Hashem always creates the cure before the illness. Refuah kodem lamakom. I believe Hashem created this recent emunah revolution that's taken place in recent years at exactly the time when we will need it most, during this pandemic of COVID-19. let me share with you just a couple of stories that beautifully illustrate the power of a life that is led with real emunah, faith and belief and knowledge that Hashem was with me at all times. I mean, before I tell you the stories, just before I was reading a book called Emunah with Chicken Soup about the famous Rebbetzin Henny Machlis. And, you know, we were saying that not everybody can just get the manna falling down from heaven. You have to be on that level, not like Shmelka, who wasn't quite there in that story. But Rebbetzin Machlis, she really was. Every Shabbat she had between 150 and 200 people who ate at her Shabbos table. She was an absolute wonder, a mofes, a walking example of emunah and bitachon. The story is told that one time, people used to come in at all times of the day and night and ask for food, for support, for encouragement, for advice. One time, a Sephardi lady came in and asked for dagim charifim, for sharp, spicy fish, as Sephardim like to enjoy. She went over to the fridge, she looked through it, there weren't any dagim charifim. She said, you can have whatever you want from the fridge, but I'm sorry, I don't have these spicy fish that you want. No, she said, I haven't eaten for 3 days, that's what she said. I need dagim charifim. Just at that time, a neighbor who was called Mrs. Larry, true story, a few minutes later came round and said, I have some dagim charifim. She was Sephardi, the neighbor. Would you like it? And there is story after story that illustrate the level of emunah that she lived at. She lived on a different plane in a different world. An amazing lady. But let me tell you a story that just took place very, very recently, a few months ago. So there's a man, we'll call him Raphael to protect his identity. He was presented with the following Nisayon test, the following challenge. He was struggling with his business, as most people are at the moment. And every day he really tried his best to make sure that he earned as much as he could. Life was a struggle. So he was speaking with a potential buyer on the phone for an item that he had. He had hospital gowns, PPE, that sort of thing. The buyer agreed to take thousands of them at a price of $3 per gown, and Raphael accepted. The very next day, would you believe it? Another buyer calls about those same gowns and offers Raphael $4.75 a piece. That would mean, obviously, a much larger profit for him. So immediately, you can imagine the thoughts that are going through his mind. The cogs are turning. He starts to rationalize in his mind the reasons why the first deal wasn't really binding. They didn't have a contract. The goods weren't shipped yet. The money wasn't paid. So he calls back the first buyer, who happens to be a Jew, and he tells him that he wants to back out, being that he wasn't offered, being that he was offered much more money by somebody else, and they hadn't yet signed the contract. It wasn't binding. The buyer was very upset. He said, we made a deal on the phone. It's not right to back out. But Raphael persisted. He says, times are tough. Please understand, I need the extra money. I'm really sorry. After Raphael hangs up the phone, he doesn't feel right about what he said, about what he did. So he calls a friend to discuss it. So that person suggests that Raphael call back the buyer and see if they can meet halfway, if they can negotiate, if they can meet somewhere in the middle. So he did that. He calls back, and the buyer ends up accepting a deal for $3.85. But after that deal was finalized, and Raphael had put down the phone, he still feels uneasy about what he did. His father had recently passed away, and all he could think about was how honest, how straight, how upright his father was. His word was his word. He will never go back on it for any amount of money. And then he starts to think that this whole thing was a test from Hashem. And if he failed, there will be no blessing from that money. He calls the first buyer back again and he says, I'm very sorry for what I just put you through. It wasn't right. You were right the first time. My word is my word. I told you $3 a gallon, and that's what I want to take, $3 a gallon, not a penny more. The buyer was very impressed. He said to him, you're a mensch. This is the way business is supposed to be done. This is the way Jewish people are supposed to act. I'm so happy to be doing business with you. Raphael, he says, he recounts that the difference between selling the gowns for $3 a piece instead of $3.85, it cost him about $12,000 in profit. That's how much he lost. But it was worth every penny. He felt so good that he overcame the test, and that was worth more than anything in the world. So really, ladies, we could stop the story here, but it continues. Over the next week, this buyer decides to place new large orders with Raphael. Because he was so impressed with his integrity, with his honesty, with his yashras, he says, I want to do more business with you. That's what he told Raphael. And the profit Raphael made from those orders exceeded $85,000. True story, took place recently. This is how it works with every test in our life. Our vision gets skewed. We see the potential immediate gains of our negative actions, and it causes us to justify them. If we could withstand the tests and choose the way Hashem wants us to choose, we'll benefit far more than we would have the other way. You will not always see the immediate gains to those good decisions. It doesn't always end off in that happy way. It doesn't always end happily ever after. But Hashem is trustworthy. We might not see it straight away, but he is trustworthy. He keeps his word, and he will pay us back for every single sacrifice and challenge that we overcome. And finally, I would like to share with you the following story that shows the Kiddush Hashem that we can create, that can come about through Emunah and integrity. I heard this story again quite recently. Mr. Sol Werdiger is the CEO of Outer Stuff. It's a large company that produces sports apparel. One day he receives a phone call from a Mr. Oh Jun. He was the South Korean UN ambassador, and he asks Mr. Werdiger to meet him for a lunch at a kosher restaurant in Manhattan. Although Mr. Werdiger did not know the purpose of the meeting, he agreed to meet up with Mr. Jun. When an ambassador calls you and asks for a meeting, you don't turn him down. When they meet, Mr. Jun tells Sol the following. I've always heard negative stereotypes about Jews and Israel, and I take it at face value. Then my daughter took an internship working on design in your company. Throughout the year, she's been telling me how wonderful it is to work at your company. Sol Werdiger didn't realize who this girl was, that her father was such an important, such an influential gentleman. Mr. June continues. There are 4 areas which stood out and impressed my daughter. Number 1, every day at 1:30 p.m., no matter what was going on at the office, all the men, including those from neighboring offices, retreated into an office, into another room, to pray with sincerity and calm. Number 2, every Friday, the office shuts down early in the afternoon in preparation for your Holy Sabbath. And it's closed the entire day. It's closed for everybody. This includes all workers, no matter what faith or religion that they maintain. Number 3, my daughter observed that each petitioner for charity, and there were many, were treated with respect and left with a check in hand. And number 4, my daughter was treated with the utmost respect and dignity and was always paid on time and in full. Mr. June says, because of the amazing experience and lessons the company taught my daughter, he says to Sol Werdiger, I want to write you a check for all the money that you pay my daughter. I want to give it back to you. Of course, Mr. Werdiger, he's not interested. He won't hear of it. He says, your daughter worked and earned her salary and rightfully deserves her pay and will not accept any remuneration. And then the ambassador relayed the most amazing thing. It's absolutely amazing. As you know, he says, I have voting privileges at the UN because of my renewed appreciation of the Jewish people. I abstained from voting on resolutions against Israel on 3 occasions. At one resolution, he says, I was the 9th vote needed to pass the motion and resolution against Israel. And because I abstained, it did not pass. Mr. Werdiger, he says, and I heard it from him, no one at the office had any idea that this girl was the daughter of an ambassador to the UN. No one ever imagined what type of impact, the typical conduct, how they lived every day, how they conducted their financial affairs would have on her, and how this impacted on votes against Israel, how it had such a ripple effect on Israel and the Jewish people. 2 beautiful stories. Just want to end off now and speak about segulas for parnasa, things that we can do to increase our merits, so that please God Hashem should all give us a good parnasa, so that we should all have as much money as we need. Now, there are tried and tested segulas for parnasa, and there are many stories of people who are careful with these and they merited to have financial security and wealth. For example, the Sepharim, they speak about saying brachas with kavanah. A beautiful thing to do. Saying birchas hamazon, benching, grace after meals, after a meal. That is another one. The food that Hashem gives us, to thank Hashem with feeling, with kavanah. Another segula. Parshas Haman. Not Parshas Haman. He's from the Purim story, but Haman. The parsha all about how Hashem would rain down that heavenly food, that heavenly bread from the skies, from Shemayim, and feed the Jewish people for those 40 years in the desert. Some people say that every day. And giving tzedakah, giving Maisa a tenth, a minimum of a tenth of one's earnings is a very powerful thing to do. I can say I've spoken to many people, regular people, normal people, who are meticulous in this area. And they have told me that when they were struggling, one person told me recently that he was struggling for a time, had lots of bills, children, school, university. So he decided he would give more money to tzedakah. Counterintuitively, he decided to give more money to tzedakah. He said he's not giving enough. He and his wife decided to give more money to tzedakah. And they saw straight away their business started improving. A few people have told me this. It really does work. I want to give another formula that leads to wealth. And this one, it doesn't come with some of the possible drawbacks that wealth can lead to. As we know, sometimes wealth is not always a blessing. It can bring unhappiness. But the following piece of advice, the following segula, will also bring contentment and serenity in all cases. As it says in Pirkei Avos, Ezehu asher hasamech b'chod. Who is wealthy? He who is content with his lot. Being content with your lot brings real everlasting wealth and happiness. And is also a tried and tested formula. We should never forget this. Please God, we should all have wealth. And we should all have all the brachas from Hashem. And we should also have the ability to be content, to be samech b'chalkoi, and wealthy in that respect. Satisfied, happy, serene with the lot Hashem has given us. Because this is the greatest bracha of wealth that we can have. With this attitude, please God, we can have a renewed appreciation of Emunah, to grow in Emunah. There are no limits to Emunah. There is no glass ceiling. It is something that everybody can attain. In this week's Seder, we are told Abraham Avinu, he grew in his Emunah. It says, we say in davening, Avraham Avinu was constantly growing in his belief. And how did he bring people closer to Hashem? In this week's Seder, he would invite them round to his home, give them some food, a drink, a piece of food, say to them, do you know who gave us this apple, this bread, this water? Hashem, make a bracha. Through chesed, he brought people to a realization, to an understanding that Hashem guides and directs every move that we make. It wasn't through long sermons or philosophical debates. It was through chesed, Emunah. We learn it from Avraham Avinu in this week's Seder, and we learn it from all these stories, from all these anecdotes, and from these seforim that teach us how we can grow in Emunah. To develop this gift further and further. It's not all or nothing. It is something that we all can grow incrementally, gradually, something that we can all build upon day by day and year by year. And please God, in the merit of Emunah that we should all have and develop, Hashem should give us brachas and simchas and nachas.